If you've ever worked the night shift alone, you know that certain buildings make their own sounds. Creaks, knocks, thuds, most of it you learn to ignore. But what I heard that night wasn't just a sound. It was someone whispering my name from a room I knew was locked. A room no one had the key to for over 2 years. I work in property management. Not the fancy side of it. No suits, no office view, no free coffee. I'm the guy they call when a commercial tenant moves out and the building needs to be cleaned, cleared, or inspected for damages. Most of the time, I'm alone. That's just how it goes. This particular job was in a 3-story office building in Pennsylvania, out near Scranton. Not quite city, not quite rural. A mix of law firms, accountants, and a defunct insurance company that had occupied the entire 3rd floor until the pandemic wiped them out. The building had been mostly empty since 2021, but a new leasing company had taken over and wanted everything inspected and photographed before listing it again. I was hired for a week to walk through every floor, take inventory, clean out what I could, and note anything that needed serious repair. I arrived Monday morning. The power still worked, surprisingly. The HVAC didn't, which made the building cold in the mornings and hot by 2 p.m. The place smelled like dust and stale paper. Every room was the same. Empty desks, file cabinets, broken chairs, old Ethernet cables hanging from ceilings like cobwebs. The 2nd floor had some water damage. The 1st floor was easy, but the 3rd floor? That floor was different. From the moment I stepped out of the stairwell, it felt colder. The lights flickered more often. The hallway was lined with office doors, most open, a few closed. And then there was that one room, Suite 301, with a heavy wooden door that didn't match the others. It was locked. No keypad, no sign, just a label that said private. I didn't think much of it the first day. Maybe it was storage, or maybe the lock was jammed. I made a note and moved on. That night, I stayed late, reviewing pictures and notes. I set up my laptop in the lobby, near the front doors. Around 9 p.m., the building made a loud thud, like something heavy dropping upstairs. I froze. It was probably something shifting from the temperature change. That happens. Still, I grabbed my flashlight and went up just to make sure. Nothing was out of place, except Suite 301's door was slightly open. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe I didn't check it properly. Maybe it wasn't really locked. But I'm telling you, I tried that handle earlier. It was stiff, like someone hadn't turned it in years. I pushed the door open and shined my light inside. It was a small room. Just one wooden desk, a leather chair facing the window, and a rotary phone sitting right in the middle. No computer, no papers, no decorations. I stepped inside and felt instantly watched, like someone was still sitting in the chair even though it was empty. The phone gave me a weird feeling. Not fear exactly, but unease. Why was it still there? Who even used a rotary phone anymore? I didn't touch anything. I backed out, closed the door, and this time I'm sure I locked it. I went home that night and told myself to forget about it. Maybe the lock wasn't secure. Maybe someone came earlier and left the door ajar. It happens. Tuesday, I returned early to beat the heat. Spent most of the day in the basement sorting old HVAC filters and lighting ballasts. I avoided the 3rd floor. But at around 6 p.m., I had to go up to double-check the meter room, which was next to Suite 301. This time, as I came up the stairs, the air felt thicker, like the hallway had no circulation at all. I walked toward the meter room and passed the locked door, except it wasn't locked, it was wide open. Inside, the desk was still there, the rotary phone too. But now, the leather chair was turned to face the doorway, and on the seat was something that hadn't been there before. A man's necktie, faded navy with little white squares. It looked old, smelled musty. I stared at it for a long time before walking away. Again, I locked the door. Even pushed a small filing cabinet in front of it for good measure. That night, I left early. I didn't go in Wednesday. I made up some excuse and said I needed an extra day to gather tools. But Thursday, I went back. I had to. It was my last scheduled day. I started with the basement, then the first floor, saving the third for last. I walked up slowly, flashlight in hand even though it was still daytime. The hallway was dead silent. I turned the corner and froze. The filing cabinet was moved, not knocked over, not tipped, just neatly placed back against the wall, like someone was tidying up. And the door to Suite 301 cracked open. Again. This time, I lost my patience. I went in fast, ready to find some squatter or smartass playing tricks. But the room was empty. Chair back at the window. No tie. But the phone was off the hook. The receiver lay on the desk. Not dropped. Placed. I stared at it for a long time before I did something I still can't explain. I picked it up, put it to my ear. There was no dial tone, no static, just silence. And then, a whisper, not a voice, not a word, just a breath, like someone was inhaling slowly on the other end. I dropped the phone and stepped back. The breath didn't stop. It got louder. And then it whispered my name. I didn't imagine it. It said my name. Soft, slow, familiar, like someone had known me a long time. I left the building, didn't turn off lights, didn't log my time, just walked straight to my car. I didn't tell anyone, not officially. I finished the job report, marked Suite 301 as locked, inaccessible, and never returned. 3 months later, I got a call from the leasing company. A new tenant was moving into the third floor. They wanted to renovate all the suites. The project manager asked if I'd been in 301. I said, "Not really, no. Why?" There was silence on the other end. Then he said, "There's nothing in that room. No desk, no chair, no phone. It's completely empty. Looks like it's been empty for years." I asked if anyone had taken furniture out. He said, "There's no sign anything was ever in there. Not even dust rings on the floor, just 4 walls, clean. I don't work alone anymore." I never found out what that room was used for, or why it was locked so long. No one I spoke to could even remember who used to lease that floor. I've thought about going back, just to prove to myself it happened. But something tells me I wouldn't find it again. Or worse, something would find me. They said no one had used that grain silo since 1998. But one night while working alone on a foggy farm in Iowa, I heard someone knocking from the inside 3 times. Slow, deliberate. When I opened the hatch the next morning, the inside was still locked from the outside, but there were handprints all over the metal walls, pressed into the dust from the inside. I was working contract maintenance across several agricultural properties in Iowa back in 2022. Nothing fancy, just a pickup, a toolbox, and a rotation of farms that needed repairs, especially during the off-season. One of the properties was a sprawling corn farm just outside of Cedar Rapids. It had been passed through a few owners and sat half-abandoned for a while. The current owner lived out of state and was looking to sell, so he hired me to come twice a week, check for vandalism, make minor repairs, and keep the place from falling apart. It was peaceful usually. Quiet fields, long gravel driveways, deer in the distance, sometimes the sound of freight trains at night. But the area was isolated, and the main barn, the one next to the old grain silo, always made me feel like I shouldn't be there after dark. The silo itself was tall, rusted in streaks, and no longer operational. The owner told me it had been decommissioned over 20 years ago after someone got injured falling inside. Since then, the bottom hatch had been welded shut, and the top hatch, accessible only by a narrow external ladder, was padlocked. The first few weeks were normal. I cleaned up storm debris, reinforced the barn's side wall, replaced light bulbs, chased out a raccoon or two. But one night in mid-October, I stayed later than usual. A fog rolled in around dusk, the kind that makes headlights useless and deadens sound. I was inside the barn trying to replace a busted fuse box when I heard a knock. 3 slow knocks, coming from the silo. At first I froze. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Metal on metal. I thought maybe something fell. Some old part shifting inside, hitting the wall. I ignored it. Then it happened again. Same rhythm. 3 knocks. I walked outside with my flashlight. The fog made it hard to see, but I followed the sound to the silo. Nothing was around it. The air was still. I tapped on the silo's side myself. The sound matched exactly. I tried the base hatch, even though I knew it was welded shut. It didn't budge. I looked up the ladder. The padlock was still in place, no sign of anyone. I told myself it was echoing metal. Old structures do that. But the whole drive home, I kept thinking, it knocked twice. Same rhythm, not random, not weather. The next time I went back, 2 days later, I checked the silo first. No tracks in the dirt, no damage. Everything looked untouched. But then I stepped inside the barn and immediately noticed something off. The air smelled wrong. Mustier than before? Like damp concrete. And something else. Something that smelled like rotted wheat. The lights flickered even though they were brand new. I ignored it. That night, while replacing a broken window on the far end of the barn, I heard it again. 3 knocks, same pattern, same speed. From the silo. This time, I walked out faster. Shined my flashlight up the ladder. Nothing. I stood there and called out, "Hey, if someone's messing around, it's private property." No response. I walked around the silo, even checked inside the nearby shed to be sure no one was hiding. Then, just as I was walking back toward the barn, louder, from higher up, maybe 20 feet up the silo. That was it for the night. I packed up and left. No way I was staying alone. The next morning, I called the owner. I didn't tell him everything, just that someone might have been trespassing and I needed permission to open the silo to check inside. He told me it hadn't been touched in decades and said I'd need bolt cutters to get the padlock off. He was more annoyed about the liability than the knocking. So the next day I came back with gear. The fog had returned, thicker than before. It rolled over the fields and made everything look like a faded photograph. I parked near the silo and climbed up with a pair of bolt cutters. The lock snapped easily. I pulled the hatch open. It was pitch black inside. I aimed my flashlight down through the opening. Dust. Dust everywhere. The walls were coated in it. The floor, too. It looked untouched, like a time capsule. And then I saw them. Handprints, hundreds of them, all on the inside, smeared across the metal walls, some high, some low, some small like a child's, others larger. All pressed into the dust from the inside. Like someone or something had been clawing, pushing, or trying to get out. I nearly dropped my flashlight. There was no ladder inside, no floor hatch, no sign of animals, and no way someone could have been in there unless they were locked in from the top, which hadn't been opened since 1998. The creepiest part? Most of the handprints were cleaner than the rest of the dust, like they'd been made recently. I didn't even climb down. I shut the hatch, clicked a new lock on it, and left. Told the owner everything. He thought I was exaggerating. Said I must have been seeing old maintenance marks. I didn't argue. But I never went back. 1 month later, I got a call from a local police officer. He was following up after someone reported trespassing on the property. I told him what I'd experienced and asked what happened. He hesitated, then said, "We found footprints around the barn, bare feet, in the frost. They led from the back door to the silo, then vanished." I asked if the new padlock had been touched. He said no. It was still locked. To this day, I have no explanation. The silo had no access from below. The inside was sealed for over 2 decades. Yet something, or someone, left fresh handprints and knocked from within. I've worked a lot of jobs since, but I never ignore the sound of 3 knocks anymore, especially when I'm alone. I was doing the night shift alone at a meat processing plant in Nebraska. At around 3 a.m. I heard someone moving inside the cooling room, where the temperature is kept below freezing and no one is supposed to be during the night. I opened the door expecting maybe a raccoon or a loose compressor part rattling. What I saw standing between the hanging sides of beef was a barefoot man, just standing there. And when I turned the lights on, he wasn't there anymore. I took a job back in 2021 as a janitor and maintenance tech at a meatpacking facility in Nebraska. I won't name the company, but it was one of those massive plants where the smell hits you the second you get out of your car, blood, bleach, and old metal. I was desperate for work, and the pay was decent, especially for night shifts. The plant was cold 24/7, but there was one room that was colder than the rest, the cooling room, where the processed meat was stored before transport. You needed a special key to open it, and the safety policy was clear: never go in alone, and never stay in there longer than necessary. The temperature sat at around 2 degrees high, but because it was night, and because I was one of 2 people working the whole floor, I had to check it occasionally, mainly to confirm that no equipment was malfunctioning or leaking. Still, I always hated going near it. The motion lights in there didn't always work, and the meat hanging from the rails would creak like someone shifting behind curtains. My job started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. The plant was nearly dead by then. Production stopped around 7, so most nights it was just me, the security guy up front, and maybe 1 or 2 freezer workers doing early prep. The first few weeks were fine. Long hours, repetitive work, nothing unusual. But then I started hearing footsteps, always around the same time, between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m., and always coming from the cooling room. At first, I assumed it was just the building shifting. The meat rails sometimes made dragging sounds as things settled, especially during temperature shifts. But then I heard something more specific: shuffling, like someone barefoot, dragging one foot. The footsteps stopped when I approached. I peeked through the small window in the cooling room's steel door. Nothing. Just meat hanging in rows, gently swaying. Still, the sound repeated the next few nights. Eventually, I decided to go in and check. One night, I waited until I heard the sound again. 3:03 a.m., shuffling footsteps, something brushing against the metal racks. I grabbed the master key, took a flashlight, and slowly unlocked the cooling room door. A wave of freezing air rushed out like dry ice fog. I stepped in. No motion light. Dead bulbs again. The hanging sides of beef swung slightly, creaking on their hooks. The smell of cold flesh was stronger than usual. I moved my flashlight beam slowly across the rows. That's when I saw it. Between the last 2 rows, just standing, there was a man. Barefoot, shirtless, pale as frost. He wasn't doing anything, just standing between the slabs, like he had been there the whole time. Like he was watching me. I froze. My breath fogged up my glasses. I whispered, "Sir, are you okay?" Thinking maybe someone got locked in. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. I reached for the light switch near the back. Click, fluorescence buzzed on. He was gone. No sound, no movement. Just the hanging meat. No footprints on the frosty floor. No door open, nothing. I stumbled backward and nearly dropped the flashlight. I told the security guard up front. He didn't laugh, but he also didn't look surprised. "You're not the first to see something in that room," he said quietly. I asked what he meant. He leaned in and said, "Back in 2014, one of the overnight techs passed out in there. Forgot his timer, stayed in too long, froze to death before anyone found him. Thing is, he was barefoot when they found him, boots neatly set at the door." I asked if anyone ever explained it. "Nope," he said. But folks stopped doing solo checks after that. I asked why they didn't lock it off completely. "Company doesn't like losing space," he said. "Dead or not, meat's gotta move." After that night, I stopped checking the cooling room unless I absolutely had to. But something changed. The footsteps didn't stop. They got more frequent, and it wasn't just footsteps. One night I heard breathing. Not mine. Not the HVAC, human breathing, raspy. Right outside the janitor's closet where I was sitting for lunch. I opened the door immediately. The hallway was empty, but I noticed something on the floor, a wet footprint, one, bare, left foot, heading toward the cooling room. I followed it until it faded on the concrete. That same night I went back to the front desk and asked the security guy if the cameras worked in that hallway. He shook his head. Camera 4's been down for months. Of course it had. On my last week at the plant, things escalated. I was wiping down the far end of the processing line around 2:50 a.m. when the lights started flickering. Then, a loud crash echoed from the SIOS cooling room, something metal hitting the floor. I ran over, thinking a rack had fallen. As I approached the door, I saw it swinging slightly. Unlocked. I knew I had locked it after the previous check. Inside, the meat racks were shaking. I could hear the squeal of the wheels on the rail system, like someone was running their hands along the hanging meat. I opened the door slowly. The lights were already on this time. The room was empty, but at the far end of the room, scratched into the condensation on the steel wall, were 3 letters. Run, and under it, a handprint. Bare. Human. Palm open and flat. I quit the next morning. Didn't give notice. Didn't care about the paycheck. I left my badge in the locker and drove straight home. A month later, I drove past the plant out of curiosity. It had been shut down temporarily due to equipment failure and OSHA violations. I checked the local paper. A worker had gone missing on site during night shift. His last known location? Inside the cooling room? They never found him.